Black bride refused to marry obese white waiter. What she didn't know about him shocked everyone. He's a Korean mafia boss. The air inside St. Jude Cathedral was heavy with the scent of 5,000 imported white lilies, a floral wall that masked the scent of the city's rain-slicked asphalt outside. Gold leaf shimmered on the vaulted ceilings, reflecting the light of 100 crystal chandeliers. This was the wedding of the century, a merger of power and prestige that had brought the city's elite to a standstill. But as Imani Brooks stood at the end of the aisle, her heart wasn't racing with love, it was pounding with a sense of profound insult. She was a vision of defiance in her intricate lace gown, the sparkling tiara atop her head catching the light like a crown of ice. She had expected a king. Instead, she was looking at the man she had been told was her betrothed. A man who looked entirely out of place in this temple of wealth. Jang Hyun-woo stood at the altar, looking slightly disheveled in a tuxedo that hung awkwardly, his frame appearing soft and unassuming. To the prying eyes of the high society guests, he looked like a common waiter who had won the lottery, a man utterly unworthy of the striking woman walking toward him. But as Imani reached the steps of the altar, she caught something that the rest of the room missed. She looked into his eyes, expecting to see the timid gaze of a man punching above his weight. Instead, she found a pair of dark, obsidian orbs that remained eerily still. Behind the mask of the bumbling, ordinary man, there was a predatory stillness. It was in the way his hand rested near his hip, not the gesture of a nervous groom, but the muscle memory of a man used to the weight of a holster. Hyun-woo gave a slight, almost imperceptible smirk. It wasn't friendly. It was the look of a hunter who had successfully lured his prize into a gilded cage. He looked at Imani not as a partner, but as a masterpiece he had finally acquired. The obese waiter act was a thin veil, one that was beginning to tear under the sheer force of his hidden presence. Every time he shifted, the tailored black fabric of his inner vest, flashing a subtle, blood-red silk, hinted at the dragon beneath the suit. "You're not him," Imani whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of shock and dawning horror as she stood mere inches from him. The opulent music of the string quartet seemed to fade into a dull hum, replaced by the sudden, heavy silence of the guests. Hyun-woo didn't answer with words. He simply tilted his head, his sharp facial features finally catching the light. The disguise was dropping. The clumsy posture straightened, his shoulders broadening as his true, imposing silhouette filled the space. The man everyone thought was a joke had just become the most dangerous person in the room. The heavy silence of the cathedral was broken not by the priest's blessing, but by a sound that chilled Imani to her marrow, the synchronized, metallic slide of safeties being clicked off. It started in the front pews, among the men she had assumed were Hyun-woo's distant, awkward relatives. They rose as one, shedding their ill-fitting jackets to reveal holsters strapped over sweat-stained shirts. Imani's breath hitched, her gloved hands tightening around her bouquet until the stems of the lilies snapped. "Hyun-woo, what is this?" she hissed, her eyes darting from the gunman to the man who was supposed to be her husband. But the man standing before her had completely shed his bumbling facade. He didn't look like a waiter anymore, he looked like a god of war. With a slow, deliberate movement, Hyun-woo reached up and adjusted his collar, revealing the edge of a deep crimson tattoo, the tail of a dragon winding its way up his neck toward his jawline. At that signal, the guests on the left side of the aisle ripped away their sleeves. Intricate, dark-inked patterns of scales and mythical beasts emerged, marking them as soldiers of the Korean syndicate. On the right side, a rival faction stood up, their hands reaching into flower arrangements to retrieve hidden submachine guns. The wedding guests screamed, a wave of silk and pearls diving for the marble floor as the cathedral transformed from a sanctuary into a kill zone. Imani felt the world tilt. She looked down at the hand Hyun-woo offered her. It was no longer the soft, shaky hand of a clumsy commoner, it was scarred, steady, and held a blackened Glock with terrifying familiarity. The shock on her face was absolute, a mask of shattered porcelain. She had spent months complaining about his lack of ambition, his poor taste, and his common nature, only to realize she had invited the devil to the altar. You lied to me, she gasped, her voice barely audible over the shouting and the frantic movement of the gunman. Every word, every look, it was all a lie. Hyunwoo's smirk returned, sharper and more lethal than before, as he stepped in front of her to shield her body with his own. I never lied about wanting you, Imani, he said, his voice dropping into a low, commanding growl that vibrated in his chest. I just didn't tell you what I had to kill to get you here. As the first window shattered from a sniper's bullet, Imani realized something blue wasn't a garter or a jewel. It was the cold blue steel of the weapon now clutched by the man she had just promised to spend her life with. The first shot didn't just break a window, it shattered the last remnants of the world Imani thought she knew. As glass rained down like jagged diamonds onto the marble floor, Hyunwoo didn't flinch. In an instant, the obese waiter with the clumsy gait disappeared, replaced by a man who moved with the fluid, terrifying grace of a predator. He lunged toward Imani, his massive frame eclipsing her. Before she could scream, his arm was around her waist, pulling her behind the thick, hand-carved oak of the pulpit just as a hail of bullets shredded the white lilies where she had been standing seconds before. Stay down and don't move, he commanded. The voice was no longer soft or bumbling, it was a cold, vibrating steel that brooked no argument. Imani watched, her back pressed against the wood, as Hyunwoo stepped into the line of fire. He didn't hide. He moved through the chaos with a calculated precision that was hypnotic and horrifying. He fired 2 shots, dry, rhythmic cracks, and 2 gunmen in the third row collapsed before they could even level their sights. A rival assassin lunged at him from the side, swinging a heavy combat knife. Imani gasped, expecting the waiter to be overwhelmed. Instead, Hyunwoo caught the man's wrist with a sickening snap, disarmed him in a blur of motion, and used the attacker as a human shield while systematically clearing the left aisle. His smirk never reached his eyes, they remained flat and crystalline, scanning the room for threats with surgical detachment. He was a whirlwind of violence. He used the very environment of the wedding, heavy silver candelabras, silk runners, and mahogany pews, as weapons or cover. He moved with a lethal efficiency that proved he hadn't just studied combat, he had survived it 1,000 times over. Every movement was a testament to his hidden power, a brutal dance that left a trail of fallen men in the wake of his tailored black suit. Imani felt a wave of nausea mixed with a strange, terrifying heat. She had spent their courtship looking down on him, mocking his ordinariness and his lack of fire. Now, seeing him stand amidst the smoke and the screams, she realized the fire had always been there, it was just the kind of fire that consumed everything it touched. He turned back to her, his face splattered with a crimson drop that wasn't his own. He reached out a hand, his obsidian eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that demanded submission. The ceremony is over, Imani, he said, the smirk returning, lethal, cunning, and dominant. Now, we leave. The smell of gunpowder began to choke out the scent of the lilies, and a fire, sparked by a shattered candelabra, started to lick at the heavy velvet curtains of the altar. The cathedral was a vision of hell, but as Hyunwoo reached for Imani's arm to pull her toward the side exit, he hit a wall he didn't expect. Imani didn't move. She dug her heels into the marble, her lace train snagging on a splintered pew. With a violent jerk, she ripped her arm out of his grasp. Her tiara was tilted, and her white veil was torn, but her eyes blazed with a defiance that stopped the Mafia Boss in his tracks. Don't you dare touch me, she spat, her voice ringing out over the roar of the growing flames. You don't get to play the hero now. Not after this. Imani, the building is compromised, Hyunwoo said, his voice dropping into that dangerous, low register. We have 30 seconds before the Hanguk reinforcements block the perimeter. Move. Now. No. She screamed, crossing her arms over her chest, her chin tilted high despite the chaos. The shock had passed, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. I am not moving a single inch until you tell me who you are. I was promised a husband, not a massacre. I spent months thinking you were a pathetic, bumbling fool, but you're just a monster in a better suit. Hyun-woo took a step toward her, his imposing shadow falling over her white dress. Around them, his men were exchanging final volleys of gunfire with the retreating rivals, and the heat from the altar was becoming unbearable. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw that she wasn't trembling from fear, but from the sheer force of her own standards. She wouldn't be a trophy saved from a burning building, she would be a partner who knew the price of her life. You want the truth while the world burns? Hyun-woo asked, his smirk fading into something raw and terrifyingly honest. He stepped into her space, his face inches from hers, the heat of the fire reflecting in his obsidian eyes. The waiter you despised was a lie to see if you were as shallow as the rest of this city. The man standing here is Jang Hyun-woo, the head of the Golden Dragon Syndicate. Everything you see, the gold, the church, the blood, it all belongs to me. And now, so do you. Imani didn't flinch. She stared directly into the eyes of the city's most feared man, her chest heaving. I don't belong to anyone, dragon, she whispered, her voice like a knife. If you want me to walk out of this church with you, you'd better start realizing that this isn't a kidnapping. It's a negotiation. For the first time, Hyun-woo's eyes widened. A genuine, dark laugh escaped his throat as he realized he hadn't just married a bride, he had married a queen who could survive the fire. Fine, he grunted, offering his hand again, this time with a hint of genuine respect. A negotiation it is. But let's negotiate in the car before the roof collapses on our heads. The armored sedan roared through the rain-slicked streets of the city, eventually diving into a hidden industrial elevator that descended deep beneath a nondescript textile factory. When the doors finally hissed open, they were in a bunker that looked more like a high-tech command center than a safe house. Steel walls, flickering monitors, and a wall of weaponry provided a grim backdrop to Imani's tattered white lace. Imani paced the length of the cold floor, her wedding gown trailing behind her like the ghost of a life she no longer possessed. She finally stopped, turning to face Hyun-woo, who had shed his oversized tuxedo jacket to reveal the tailored, red-lined vest beneath. He was cleaning a smear of soot from his cheek, his movements calm and clinical. Talk, Imani commanded, her voice echoing off the reinforced concrete. Why me? Why the disguise? And why did you let those men turn my wedding into a graveyard? Hyun-woo set the cloth down and leaned against a steel desk, his sharp features illuminated by the blue glow of the monitors. Because a black bride from a family as prestigious as yours wasn't just a marriage to me, Imani. It was a target. My family has sat on the throne of the Golden Dragon for 3 generations, and for 3 generations, we've watched our loved ones be used as leverage. My own mother was taken because she was a liability. I swore I would never let that happen again. He took a step toward her, his posture losing its aggressive dominance for a moment of rare vulnerability. The waiter persona wasn't just to test your character. It was to hide you from the Hanguk clan. If the world believed I was marrying a commoner, a nobody, they wouldn't look at you twice. I wanted to give you a life where you could walk down the street without a sniper's dot on your forehead. Imani let out a harsh, disbelieving laugh, her crossed arms tightening. So you lied to protect me? You made me look like a fool in front of my father, my friends, and the entire city because you were afraid? I was careful, Hyun-woo corrected, his eyes flashing with a sudden, dark intensity. But I underestimated how desperate they were. They found out about the contract a week ago. I had a choice, cancel the wedding and put a bounty on your head, or go through with it and draw them into the open where I could finish them. Imani stepped into his space, the sparkling tiara still perched defiantly on her head. You used my wedding as bait. I used our wedding to ensure your safety for the next 50 years, he countered, his voice a low, steady rumble. I kept you in the dark because I didn't want you to have the blood of my world on your hands. But seeing you back there, standing your ground, I realize I was wrong about one thing. He reached out, his fingers grazing the intricate lace of her sleeve. You weren't a liability to be hidden. You're a queen who needs to know exactly which kingdom she's ruling. The heavy silence of the bunker was shattered by the shrill, persistent chirp of a burner phone on the steel desk. Hyun-woo's expression shifted instantly, his eyes hardening into flint as he hit the speaker. A grainy video feed flickered to life on the wall monitors, and Imani's heart plummeted. There, tied to chairs in a dimly lit basement, were her parents. Her father's face was bruised, and her mother was weeping silently, her elegant silk dress torn at the shoulder. Standing behind them was a man with a jagged scar across his throat, Ri, the ruthless leader of the Hanguk clan. A beautiful wedding, Hyun-woo, Ri's voice rasped through the speakers, dripping with malice. But you forgot that when you marry into a family, you inherit their weaknesses. You have 1 hour. Bring the deed to the port of Incheon and the keys to your northern territories. If I see a single one of your dragons, I'll start with the father and end with the bride's mother. The screen went black. Imani felt the air leave her lungs, her knees buckling as she gripped the edge of a monitor station. They have my family, she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time since the cathedral. Hyun-woo, do something. Hyun-woo stood frozen, his jaw clenched so tightly the muscles in his neck strained. His lieutenants, who had been standing at the perimeter, exchanged panicked glances. Boss, one whispered, those territories are the backbone of the syndicate. If we give them up, we lose the shipping lanes. The elders will revolt. They'll strip you of your title by morning. It was the impossible choice. In the mafia world, territory was life. To surrender it was to invite a coup from his own men. But to refuse was to sign the death warrant of the family Imani had spent her life trying to make proud. Hyun-woo turned to look at Imani. She wasn't begging. She was standing tall, her eyes fixed on him with a mix of desperation and a cold, piercing judgment. She was waiting to see if the man she had married was the protector he claimed to be, or just another tyrant who valued dirt and stone over human blood. The northern territories are worth billions, Hyun-woo said softly, almost to himself. Imani stepped forward, the lace of her gown rustling against the concrete floor. And what is my mother worth? She challenged, her voice like a whip. What is the promise you made me in that church worth if you let them die for a few shipping docks? Hyun-woo's smirk returned, but this time it was devoid of humor. It was the look of a man who was about to burn his own world down. He turned to his men, his voice snapping like a gunshot. Assemble the strike team. Prepare the deeds for transfer. Boss, you're choosing the girl over the empire, his lieutenant gasped. Hyun-woo checked the chamber of his weapon, his obsidian eyes reflecting a lethal resolve. I'm not choosing the girl, he growled. I'm choosing my wife. And by the time the sun rises, the Hanguk won't have the hands left to hold a deed. The port of Incheon was a labyrinth of rusted shipping containers and howling wind. Under the pale moonlight, the Hanguk guards stood like silhouettes of death, their rifles leveled at the approaching headlights of Hyun-woo's lone sedan. Inside the car, the tension was thick enough to suffocate. Hyun-woo gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Stay in the car, Imani, he commanded, his voice a low, jagged rasp. When the shooting starts, my men will breach from the north. I need you safe. Imani looked at him, her expression hardening behind the remains of her wedding veil. Safe? You're walking into a slaughterhouse with a stack of papers they'll kill you for anyway. They expect a mafia boss. They don't expect a bride. Before he could stop her, Imani was out of the car. She didn't run, she walked. In the middle of a shipping yard filled with killers, the sight was surreal. A stunning woman in a dramatic white wedding gown, her lace catching the wind like a sail, her tiara flashing under the industrial floodlights. The guards hesitated, their fingers freezing on their triggers. This wasn't a threat, it was a spectacle. I am Imani Brooks. She shouted, her voice echoing off the steel containers. I am the one you wanted. My husband is a coward who won't come out, so I've brought the deeds myself. She held up a thick manila envelope, her step steady as she marched toward the center of the kill zone. The distraction was perfect. The Hanguk guards, mesmerized by her beauty and her apparent betrayal, lowered their guard, their eyes following the sway of her gown. Even Ri stepped out from the shadows of a warehouse, a mocking grin on his scarred face. "So, the dragon's kitten has claws," Ri laughed, signaling his men to hold their fire. "Come closer, little bride. Let's see if those papers are real." Imani kept her eyes on Ri, but her periphery was locked on the crane shadows where she knew Hyunwoo was moving. As she reached the 10-foot mark, she tripped, a deliberate, clumsy stumble that sent the deeds flying into the air. Dozens of sheets of paper scattered in the wind like white confetti. "My apologies," she cried out, her voice high and panicked. "The wind." As the guards instinctively looked down to scramble for the blowing papers, the trap snapped shut. "Now!" Imani screamed. The darkness erupted. From the top of the shipping containers, Hyunwoo's snipers opened fire. Simultaneously, the obese waiter, turned dragon burst from the side, a silencer-equipped weapon in each hand, moving with a lethal speed that turned the warehouse floor into a meat grinder. In the chaos, one guard lunged for Imani, his hand outstretched to grab her throat. Without missing a beat, Imani swung her heavy, crystal-encrusted bouquet, a custom-made arrangement she had insisted on for its weight, smashing it directly into the man's temple. As he staggered, she dove behind a steel crate, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hyunwoo reached her in seconds, his suit jacket gone, his red-lined vest soaked in. The warehouse was silent, save for the distant hiss of the sea and the ragged breathing of Imani's parents as they were ushered to safety by Hyunwoo's most trusted men. The threat of the Hanguk was neutralized, but the air still tasted of iron and finality. Hyunwoo stood in the center of the docks, his obsidian eyes fixed on a thick, leather-bound ledger he held in his hands, the Dragon's Breath, a book containing the names, bribes, and sins of every powerful figure in the city. It was the source of his absolute power, and the reason he would always be a target. "It's not enough to kill the men who came for you tonight," Hyunwoo said, his voice sounding hollow against the wind. "As long as I sit on this throne, as long as I hold this leverage, there will always be another Ri. Another war. Another wedding in a graveyard." Imani, her white gown now gray with ash and stained with the grime of the shipyard, stepped toward him. "What are you doing, Hyunwoo?" Without a word, he pulled a silver lighter from his pocket. The flame flickered, reflecting in his sharp, tired features. With a flick of his thumb, he set the corner of the ledger ablaze. Imani watched in stunned silence as the secrets that had built an empire began to curl and blacken. He tossed the burning book into a nearby oil drum, the flames roaring upward, casting long, dancing shadows of a dragon across the shipping containers. "I'm ending the lineage," he whispered. But he wasn't finished. From the shadows of the pier, several black and white sedans pulled into the light, their sirens silent but their lights painting the docks in a strobing rhythm of red and blue. A high-ranking detective stepped out, looking at the Mafia Boss with a mix of confusion and triumph. "You're giving it all up?" Imani gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The syndicate, the protection, the wealth, you'll be a marked man without your title." "I've spent my life being the dragon," Hyunwoo said, turning to face her. The lethal smirk was gone, replaced by a look of profound, terrifying peace. He reached into his vest and pulled out an encrypted drive, the digital evidence needed to dismantle the city's corruption once and for all. He handed it to the detective, then turned back to his bride. "I'd rather be a man who is hunted with you, than a king who is safe without you." He held out his wrists as the officers approached. He was giving up his throne to the police, ensuring that the Golden Dragon Syndicate would be dismantled by the law rather than a rival's bullet. It was a tactical suicide that guaranteed Imani and her family would be placed under federal protection, the only shield strong enough to keep them safe from the remnants of his world. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Hyunwoo leaned in, his forehead resting against Imani's for a fleeting second. The negotiation is over, Imani. I gave you the truth. Now, I give you a future. Imani watched as they led him away, her tiara discarded on the cold ground. She had married a bumbling waiter, fought a mafia boss, and was now watching a man sacrifice everything for her love. The sky over the Amalfi coast was a bruised purple, bleeding into a deep, Mediterranean gold as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air here didn't smell of gunpowder or lilies, it smelled of salt spray, wild lemons, and freedom. On a secluded terrace overlooking the water, Imani stood at the stone railing. The dramatic white lace and the heavy tiara were gone, replaced by a simple, flowing silk dress that caught the evening breeze. She heard the familiar, steady footfall behind her. There was no more bumbling gait, no more hidden weapons, just the rhythmic step of a man who no longer had to carry the weight of a city on his shoulders. Hyun-woo stepped up beside her, leaning his elbows on the railing. His face was relaxed, the sharp lines of his jaw softened by the peace of their new life. After a year of legal battles and a mountain of evidence that had cleared his name through a complex deal with the authorities, the dragon was officially dead. The world believed Jang Hyun-woo had vanished, and in his place was a man who finally knew the value of a quiet night. The elders from the old syndicate tried to send a message through the Swiss accounts today, Hyun-woo said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. Imani didn't flinch. She simply turned her head, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. And I deleted it, he said, reaching out to take her hand. His grip was firm, but the scars on his knuckles had begun to fade. There is no more empire to go back to, Imani. I told you, I burned it all. Good, she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. Because I've grown quite fond of this empire. The one that only has 2 citizens. Hyun-woo looked out at the vast, open sea, his dark eyes reflecting the fading light. He had traded a throne for a life on the run, and a syndicate for a single woman's loyalty. It was a bargain most men in his position would have called madness, but as he felt the warmth of Imani's hand in his, he knew it was the only real power he had ever possessed. They had started their journey at an altar of lies, surrounded by fire and betrayal. But here, on this distant shore, they stood on an altar of truth. The Black Bride and her Mafia Boss were myths of the past. What remained was a bond forged in lead and lace, stronger than any blood-soaked contract ever written. To the new empire, Hyun-woo murmured, raising an invisible glass to the horizon. Imani squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with a future she could finally see. To the negotiation that never ends. As the stars began to poke through the velvet sky, the dragon and his queen walked back toward the lights of the villa, together, undefeated, and finally, truly free.